On my father's 65th birthday, everything seemed normal until my husband whispered, "Don't react. Wait until your mom leaves the room." Minutes later, I uncovered a secret they had hidden for 15 years. My father's 65th birthday fell on a mild March day. The small street leading to my parents' house was as quiet as it had been when I was still in school. Bare winter branches just beginning to sprout green buds, a few rain puddles from the night before still clinging to the sidewalks. Alex and I walked into the yard, carrying a gift wrapped in blue paper I had carefully chosen over the past week. The moment we opened the door, the scent of butter and vanilla cake poured out, mingling with the rich aroma of coffee. Voices from the living room floated over the soft hum of an old jazz record playing from the speaker my father had kept since his college days. Everything seemed exactly as a family gathering should be, warm, a little endearingly cluttered, and giving no hint that, in less than an hour, cracks would begin to form. My father sat at the dining table, smiling warmly as he saw us. My mother bustled around the kitchen, tossing salad while asking if I wanted something to drink. I smiled, nodded, and began helping her set out plates. Everything felt normal, just like the hundreds of times I'd come home before. Then, in the middle of it, my mother turned and said, "Alex, can you help me with something? Go into the storage room under the stairs and bring out the folding chairs. We have more guests than expected today." That storage room, there was never anything interesting in there. A low, cramped space stuffed with cardboard boxes, old suitcases, and seasonal decorations we rarely used. I'd never spent more than a minute in it. Carrying a stack of plates into the kitchen, I happened to glance toward the half-open door of the storage room. Alex was standing at the very back, his back to me. He wasn't bending over or rummaging like usual. He was completely still, his gaze fixed on the far wall. A plank of aged wood, edges slightly separated from the floor. I stepped closer to the doorway and called softly, "Alex." He turned his head slightly toward me. His usual relaxed expression was gone. His voice dropped so low only I could hear. "Don't react. Wait until your mom leaves the room." I froze for a second, my heartbeat quickening without knowing why. Behind him, my mother was still crouched in one corner of the room, digging through a plastic bin, the rustle of bags filling the silence. The air felt heavier somehow. I looked at Alex and saw him give me a subtle nod. He then spoke in a calm, casual tone loud enough for my mother to hear. "Ma'am, I think I might have to go out to the car for my tool bag." "Oh, but could you check if you still have the large tablecloth? We might need it." My mother looked up and replied, as if nothing were out of the ordinary. "Ah, yes, I'll go get it from upstairs." She left the storage room and headed up the stairs. Only when her footsteps faded did Alex turn back to me, his eyes carrying more tension than his words. He pointed to the narrow gap between the wall and the floor, a tiny opening that, if you weren't looking for it, you'd never notice. I knelt down beside Alex, my hand resting lightly on the wooden plank. With just a firm pull, it came loose with a dry crack, revealing a dark hollow space behind it. Inside, buried under thick layers of dust, sat an old metal box. It wasn't much bigger than a standard document case, but its bluish-gray paint had long peeled away, exposing deep reddish rust stains spreading across the surface. A small padlock dangled at the front, corroded but still solid. When Alex lifted the box out, the smell of aged metal and damp paper rushed up to meet me. It was musty, sharp, the unmistakable scent of something hidden away for far too long in a damp, airless space. My heartbeat quickened, not just from curiosity, but from an unshakable sense that whatever I was about to touch couldn't be undone. Alex set the box down on the wooden floor, his eyes never leaving it. He glanced around, then reached up to the pegboard by the doorway. A cluster of old keys jingled faintly, each one a different size and shape. He tried them one by one until a thin, slightly bent key slid perfectly into place. The click that followed was crisp yet cold, like snapping a wire you didn't even know was wrapped around you. The lock dropped into his hand, leaving a faint mark on the metal where it had hung for years. Alex lifted the lid. Inside wasn't gold or antique jewelry, but a neat stack of documents, their edges yellowed yet kept remarkably flat, as if someone had guarded them carefully. Sitting right on top was a cream-colored envelope. On the envelope, I instantly recognized my father's familiar handwriting, slanted slightly to the right, each letter deliberate and steady. And in that moment, a chill slid down my spine. I reached for the envelope, my fingers brushing over its rough, slightly brittle surface. The flap wasn't sealed, just tucked in, as if it had been opened before, and hastily put back. Inside was a single letter, the paper thick and faintly yellowed at the edges. The heading caught my eye first. Children's Support Trust, Orphan Assistance Program. Beneath it, in clean, formal type, the letter addressed my parents by name and warmly acknowledged their role as guardians. It went on to confirm that over the past 15 years, the trust had dispersed multiple grants and living stipends in my name, funds intended for my education, well-being, and future stability. I read the words twice, 3 times, but they didn't change. My name. 15 years. Grants and stipends. I felt my chest tighten, not from the dusty air in the storage room, but from something deeper, a kind of pressure I didn't have a label for yet. My family had never been wealthy, but we'd never been in the kind of desperate state that required outside assistance. We had a home, steady meals, birthdays with cake, even vacations once in a while. I never thought of myself as eligible, and yet here it was. 15 years of help. 15 years of money. And I had never seen a single check. So where did it all go? My mind began pulling at old threads. The piano my younger brother got in high school, the sudden home renovations paid for with savings, the unexplained trips my parents took without me. Each memory now looked different under this new light. I must have gone still, because Alex's voice was suddenly close to my ear. "Don't read it here," he said softly. I looked up. He was watching me carefully, his brows drawn together in that way he gets when he's not just concerned, when he's already thinking 2 steps ahead. "Put it back in the envelope," he murmured. "We'll take it with us. We can read the rest later, somewhere private." I hesitated, my eyes flicking to the stack of documents beneath the letter. I wanted to tear through them right then, to find every answer. But the sound of footsteps overhead reminded me we weren't alone. I slid the letter back into its envelope, tucking it into the middle of the pile as if to hide it again. Alex closed the lid, locked it, and slipped the key into his pocket without a word. "We'll leave after cake," he said under his breath, glancing toward the kitchen. "No scenes today. Not yet." The words "not yet" echoed in my mind, mingling with the question that was already burning a hole in my thoughts. Where had all that money gone? As we sat in the car, the letter resting in my bag like a heavy stone, I couldn't stop my mind from drifting back to the years before. I had always felt different, not in any special or remarkable way, but as if there was an invisible gap between me and my younger brother. He was doted on more, given what my parents called investments, better schools, extracurricular programs, even private tutors. I, on the other hand, mostly wore hand-me-downs from relatives or things bought on clearance. I still remember winter mornings when he'd head out in a brand new coat, a fresh wool scarf my mother had just bought from an expensive shop in the city, while I was still wearing the same jacket from the year before, its cuffs worn thin. The explanation was always the same. "We're not made of money, sweetheart. Saving is good for the future." The future, which I thought meant both of us. But after reading that letter, I began to wonder whose future they had been talking about. One memory stands out. I was 12 and obsessed with drawing. I begged my mother to let me take a weekend art class. She only smiled and shook her head. Too expensive. You can draw at home. You don't need a class. I believed her. Until a few months later, a brand new piano was delivered to the living room for my brother. My mother stood proudly beside it, telling a neighbor, "Investing in your son never goes to waste." I forced a smile, but something inside me quietly cracked. And there were other times, overhearing the adults talking about that money during family dinners. Their voices would drop, clinking cutlery filling the pauses, like they were discussing something delicate. I had asked once, but my mother waved me off, half joking, half serious. Grown-up business. You don't need to know. And so I didn't. For years, I thought it was just one of those harmless adult secrets, not the truth about my own life. But now, with that letter, every one of those fragments seemed to fit together into a picture, one I wasn't sure I wanted to see in full. A few days later, I found myself standing at my parents' front door again, the winter light already fading into that dim, gray blue. I had only brought a small folder, just a few of the documents from the box, not all of them. Alex had wanted to come, but I told him no. This was something I needed to do alone. My mother opened the door, her smile lasting only until she saw what I was holding. "What's that?" she asked, her voice tight. I stepped inside, my coat still on, the chill clinging to me. "I have questions," I said simply. We sat at the dining table, the same table where we'd eaten countless family dinners. My father was already there, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed, his gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder. My mother took the seat opposite me, her hands clasped together on the table, as if bracing herself. I pulled out one of the letters, sliding it toward her. The heading with the trust's name was impossible to miss. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. She barely glanced at it before pushing it back toward me. "You're misunderstanding," she said quickly. "That's nothing. Just some general charity paperwork. It's not about you. It has my name on it," I replied, my voice steady. "It says the funds were for me." Her lips tightened. "You're making too much of this. That was shared support. For the family. You're twisting it into something it's not." I waited, hoping my father would speak. He didn't. He just kept his gaze on the far wall, as if this conversation was something happening in another room. "So where did it go?" I asked finally. My mother's eyes flashed, her tone sharpening. "You don't understand how hard we've worked to keep this family afloat. Always questioning, always doubting. It's exhausting." The air between us grew heavy, thick with the kind of silence that's louder than shouting. I searched her face for even a flicker of remorse or explanation. There was nothing. My father remained silent, his jaw tight, refusing to meet my eyes. I gathered the papers back into the folder, the scrape of the cardboard against the table sounding far too loud. "All right," I said quietly. "If you won't explain, I'll find out myself." Neither of them stopped me as I stood, walked to the door, and stepped out into the cold evening air. But I could still feel my mother's gaze on my back, sharp, unyielding, and absolutely unwilling to give me the truth. The very next day, Alex reached out to a close friend of his, a lawyer who specialized in financial cases. I handed over every document I had, along with a copy of the letter from the trust. It only took a few days for the answer to come back, but every word in that report made my blood run cold and my face burn at the same time. Over the course of 15 years, the trust had disbursed a total of more than $300,000 in my name. These funds were meant to cover tuition, living expenses, and be saved for my future. But the truth was that most of it had vanished almost immediately. The transaction history showed that within 3 to 5 days of the money arriving, the entire sum, or nearly all of it, had been withdrawn. The beneficiary accounts were in my parents' names. Not joint ownership, not a family trust, but their personal accounts. And coincidentally, many of these withdrawals lined up perfectly with the purchase of a plot of land outside the city, renovations on a vacation home, and investments in my younger brother's startup. I sat for hours with the report spread out across the table, the numbers and dates boring into my eyes. Now I knew exactly where the money had gone. And more importantly, I knew they had chosen to make sure it never reached me. I didn't wait long. The next evening, I drove back to my parents' house with the entire report in my bag, every page, every transaction, every date that tied their accounts to the withdrawals. My mother opened the door, her expression already guarded. My father was in the living room, sitting stiffly in his armchair. I walked past her without a word and set the folder down on the coffee table. "Read it," I said. Neither of them moved. My mother stood with her arms crossed, my father's gaze fixed on me, cold and unblinking. I opened the folder myself, flipping through the pages until the columns of numbers and highlighted withdrawals were visible. "This is every payment the trust made in my name," I said, my voice steady. "And here," I tapped a page, "are the matching withdrawals to your accounts. Dates, amounts. And here, another tap, is where those amounts line up with the down payment on the cabin, the land outside the city, and the investments in the company." My father leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His voice was calm, but it carried a sharpness that cut through the air. "We used that money for someone who deserved it more." The words landed like a slap. There was no attempt to deny at this time, no pretense of misunderstanding. Just the bare truth, stripped of shame. He met my brother. Something inside me went completely still. I closed the folder, slid it back into my bag, and stood. "Then you've just admitted everything I need," I said quietly. My mother's face hardened. "You wouldn't drag your own family into court." I met her eyes. "I will. And if that means pulling your son into it, so be it." The silence that followed was heavy, thick enough to feel against my skin. My father leaned back in his chair, my mother's jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles jump. I didn't wait for them to speak again. I walked to the door, my hand on the knob, my voice low but unshaking. "The next time you hear from me, it'll be through my lawyer." I left without looking back. On the day of the trial, the courtroom was small, but the air inside felt heavy. I sat at the plaintiff's table, a thick folder in front of me, my fingers unconsciously tracing the edge of the paper. Alex sat beside me, his hand resting lightly on my knee, a brief touch, but enough to remind me I wasn't alone. My lawyer was the first to stand, his voice clear, each word landing on the wooden floor like a hammer. "Your Honor, these are the complete records of all disbursements from the Support Trust, all in my client's name. Included are bank statements, real estate contracts, and investment transaction records." The documents were placed on the bench. Every time my lawyer flipped to a new piece of evidence, the soft rustle of paper sounded like a blade slicing through the air. Numbers, dates, signatures, laid bare, leaving nowhere to hide. Then the trust's representative took the stand. A silver-haired man with a stern demeanor gave his statement, short but decisive. For the entirety of the 15-year period, the sole beneficiary of these funds was her. He looked directly at me, confirming before the court that the money had never been authorized for anyone else. I felt my heart pound at those words, not from surprise, but from the relief of finally hearing someone else, someone outside of me, speak the truth aloud. Across the aisle, my mother began to cry. Her sobs echoed through the room, trembling but oddly theatrical. She spoke about financial pressure, about how every decision was for the family's good, and claimed that without those choices, the family would have collapsed long ago. I didn't interrupt. I just watched her, watched the tears fall, but noticed how her eyes never once met mine. My father sat beside her, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes fixed on the table. He didn't speak, didn't defend, didn't apologize. It was as if avoiding my gaze could somehow help him avoid the truth laid out in front of him. I clenched my hands in my lap, steadying my breath. Every statement, every piece of evidence, every nod from the judge felt like another rope being cut free. And I knew, the moment I stepped out of this room, they would never hold me with their lies again. The verdict was read slowly, each word like a final seal on the long road I had traveled. The plaintiff will receive the remaining funds from the trust, along with a portion of the value of assets purchased with those funds. I didn't look across the courtroom. I knew exactly what that meant. My parents would have to sell the house I grew up in to pay the judgment. I also learned from my lawyer that my brother would have to drop out of school to help with the debt. I didn't feel triumphant. There was no rush of victory like in revenge stories. Instead, a quiet stillness settled into my breathing. I had learned the truth. I had reclaimed what was mine, and that was enough. A few weeks later, Alex and I moved into a small but sunlit apartment, its windows opening toward a row of green trees. That afternoon, I sat beside him, the sunlight spilling across the floor like a soft golden carpet. From the desk drawer, I took out the envelope I had found that day in the metal box. The letter from the trust, still neatly folded, the paper slightly yellowed. I opened it and read each line again. For the first time, I truly felt like the beneficiary they had promised I was so many years ago. Alex gave my hand a gentle squeeze. I didn't need to say anything. Everything was already behind us. And I knew that from now on, the road ahead would no longer be clouded by their secrets. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal from the very people you trusted most, you know how deep this pain can run. Share your own story in the comments, hit like if you relate, and don't forget to subscribe so we can walk this path together in search of truth and justice.